My name is Ophelie Jacobson with Campus Reform, and today we are joined by a very special guest, Professor Ilana Redstone from the University of Illinois. She is teaching a class in the spring of 2022 titled The Sociology of Political Polarization, Bigots and Snowflakes. And that course really caught our attention here at Campus Reform, so we thought we'd sit down with her, hear a little bit about the course and what this means for students at the school. So Professor Redstone, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So let's just get started. Talk to us a little bit about this course.
So the course is, the course was originally called Bigots and Snowflakes. And so, and it was called Bigots and Snowflakes, and the second part was living in a world where everyone else is wrong. And then so just by way of background, and then you start out with a sort of temporary course number, and then when you move into having a regular course, this is probably the same across any institution. When you move to having a regular course number, then there's a whole process that happens. So in part of that process, I was asked to change the name of the course to the Sociology of Political Polarization, because it's the first part before the colon that shows up on students' transcripts. And I guess they didn't think that students wanted to have bigots and snowflakes on their transcript. So anyway, so that's how so now it's called the Sociology of Political Polarization, and then the second part is Bigots and Snowflakes. So, which is a little bit more boring as a name, but whatever. And so that course, this will be the spring of 2022 will be, gosh, I'm trying to think. I guess it'll be the fourth time I've taught that course. I've taught it 3 times. And so that'll be the fourth time I've taught that course. It's an elective class through the sociology department. And so students obviously self-select into taking it, but it has been great. For me, it's certainly been a pleasure to teach. I think that by and large, students get a lot out of it. I think it would be not probably accurate to say that every student who crosses the threshold has some sort of transformative experience, but I think that for many of them it's very useful in terms of and I have some quotes, I think, on my website from students, quotes that I've put up with their permission. It's really sort of been a useful way of thinking about discourse, thinking about political polarization, thinking about how we communicate and think and talk about really complicated social problems. And just the last thing I'll say before you go to your next question is, my perspective, I also teach a course called Social Problems, which is that course I'm teaching this fall. And there is some overlap in the sense that my approach is, I'm the same person teaching both classes. And so, my approach in one class is not particularly different from my approach in the other class, even though, the material is a little bit different. And so I do have a chance to do that in the fall as well. And my general approach in this space is I am not trying to convince anybody really of anything. Like, I don't care if what your position is on affirmative action or, on whatever, pick your sort of controversial issue. But I do care that you can have a conversation about it. And so this is how I explain it to students. And so that's where I start. That's my starting place, I guess.
Can you explain how this course will be set up and what students can expect from it?
So there is, in terms of readings, it's a mixture of books and articles. And I know we read, and again, I do change it to some extent. I change it every year. I'm trying to remember, last semester, we read most of Steven Pinker's Enlightenment Now. We read most of Shelby Steele's Shame. We read Christian Smith's The Sacred Project of American Sociology. And then there's also a mix of articles. There's also, one of the things I start out with is I did a short video series through the U of I it was released last year, just called Beyond Bigots and Snowflakes. And it's just, literally, if you watch the whole thing end to end, it's probably less than 40 minutes. But it is a good, I think, also introduction for students to just, what you can expect from this class and how we're going to conduct ourselves. And I think the first assignment the last semester was to write about race-based college admissions. And I think they had to I'm trying to remember. I think they had to write about it, again, sort of from different perspectives, and, sort of, I don't want to know what your personal position is by reading your paper, this kind of thing. So I'm trying to remember. I think that, and then there was other writing as well, including a sort of reflective paper at the end of the semester.
And we actually had the opportunity to look at that syllabus. One of the things that we found was this specific part, which says, because the tilt on campus here and elsewhere is to the left, we will often focus on opinions and perspectives that are traditionally omitted, often associated with the center and the right. So obviously, you're recognizing that the tilt on campus is generally to the left. What was your inspiration in creating this course? Was it because you saw that tilt on campus?
So my background is in sociology. I mean, I have a joint degree in demography and sociology. And so I think that, you could always say, like, what makes someone, is it innate? Is it something that you learn in terms of how to, whether you're challenging status quo or whatever? That's a separate set of questions. I think that from my perspective, over a period of time, my original work was really in the area of immigration. My dissertation was on U.S. immigration, but in a very dry academic sense. Like, I didn't have a public-facing side to my work. I just sort of analyzed data and just studied U.S. immigration, and that was fine. I mean, that was sort of what I liked to do for a long time. And then over a period of time, just became very concerned about what I was seeing in terms of how really complicated questions, at least to me, what looked like really complicated questions about inequality, differences between groups, identity, fairness, all of the, and it seemed extremely oversimplified to me. And I saw the way that this was unfolding, both, I mean, again, you don't have to be a sociologist to sort of notice it. I mean, just saw the way this was unfolding with students, and I saw the way it was unfolding in a sort of discourse more broadly. And, and this seemed to be something that I could try and do. I can't restructure the world, but but I could offer this class.
What do you think is the importance of exposing these students to a variety of viewpoints, not just one set of viewpoints in the classroom?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. The whole thing, viewpoint, all this language of viewpoint diversity and free speech and self-censorship, and they're all important ideas, but it's all become so loaded that it's really hard to sort of have a conversation about it. I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. But I think what's important fundamentally, these are moral questions about social problems, about inequality. They are fundamentally moral questions. And so the language that I sort of come back to, and this is sort of more of a summary than anything else, is, this is about, are there different ways of understanding the world that can exist on equal moral footing, right? And so, and that's largely not where we are. In terms of the discourse on campus, and to a certain extent more broadly, but that's where I want to move the conversation. Is, look, like, they're reasonable. Again, the sort of the reasonable minds can look at the same information and come to very different conclusions. But again, this idea of equal moral footing, I think, is fundamentally where sort of the rub is, and so that's. Yeah, and that gets really, you quickly slide into very philosophical questions about truth and, morality and whatever. So, yeah.
Going off of that, do you still believe that diversity of thought exists on college campuses?
I mean, it does. It's just not, it's in pockets. Like, it's not sort of, I think that it's not, it's one of those things that no one says that they're against it. Right? No one says they're against free speech. Like, no one says that they're against viewpoint diversity. And it's always sort of, okay, well, and one example that I think paints this picture is, well, let's say you have somebody who says, and I'm just channeling an argument, I think that trans women should not be allowed to compete in women's category sports. Right? So, okay, so now this is where the rubber meets the road. Is that an opinion? or is that a threat to the trans community? And how, from an administrative standpoint, how do you want to respond to it, right? And you're going to have to, and so this sort of, and I think that campuses largely are trying to, I mean, again, they're trying to please everybody. And at some point, you're not going to be able to, and I think that, I'm not an administrator. I've never had an administrative position on campus, but this, from where I sit, this is what I see. And I understand, like, I get the pressures and I see all that, but it just also seems very clear that there has to be a better way to sort of engage. And I mean, so I think sorry, I'll come full circle to your question about diversity of thought. I don't think there's enough of it. I mean, so I wouldn't say, like, is there no diversity of thought? That seems I think that's a little extreme. But I don't think there's enough of it.
I think you touched on this a bit, but do you believe that the majority, so if the majority is mainly, donating to Democrats and maybe they have that leaning on campus, don't you believe that the majority has an obligation to make sure the minority is represented on campus? So bringing in those different viewpoints, regardless of political affiliation.
I'm not sure about the word obligation. I mean, I think that
maybe responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that I don't know what the perfect word is. I mean, but yeah, I think that there is, the 30,000 foot view is that it is ultimately, I believe, and nobody has to listen to me, but that it is better for society to, for sort of broad, and again, like, I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you already know. Students don't stay students. Like, this is a revolving door of people going out. And so, except for faculty, but we're on the student side. And so I think there is, personally, I do feel a moral obligation to sort of, but everyone, you do what you do the best you can, and you lay your head down at night and you hope that you've done something that's, moves things forward instead of backwards. And everyone thinks that they do that, or I'd like to think so. The way that change can happen, again, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's on campus, whether it's in a classroom, whatever, is really picking some kind of being able to articulate a goal. And then orienting towards that goal in the sense of, so I'll give you an example just from the workplace, which is obviously separate from higher education, but in some ways it's easier because there's a profit motive. And so there's an incentive there that doesn't exist in the same way in higher education. And so in the workplace, you could say, for example, we want to build a culture with open communication where innovation can thrive. Right? This would be in some of my consulting work, right? And so then now you have a sort of your North Star or whatever, and you can say, okay, well, we can respond this way, that way, whatever, on all these different issues that come up. Is it going to get us closer to this thing that we said that we wanted, or is it going to get us further from this thing? Is it going to take us further? And if higher education could do the same, right? Like, again, this is sort of the incentives questions becomes hard, but having a goal that of what you're trying to build can be really helpful. And I think that we're not, I mean, again, there's more I could say about it, but I think that we're not there yet. Not just the U of I mean, just in general.
Switching gears now a little bit from your course to the article that you wrote about campus reform. Obviously, we saw that on the internet, and we're just curious to hear, how did you first hear about campus reform?
Oh, God. I don't know. I mean, it's been a couple of years. It wasn't like I just heard about campus reform and then wrote the article. I've been aware of campus reform for a few years. I don't know, Twitter? I don't really know. I don't know where I would have first heard of it.
So I just wanted to talk about one section of the article in which you claim that we are drumming up needless hysteria and we are being hyperbolic. I was just curious if you could define what a hyperbole would be in this situation, or maybe any articles or videos that you remember that were especially hyperbolic in your opinion.
I mean, I think that I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head. I think that the portrayal of academia as, maybe it's my own optimism, as being just totally lost, a bunch of professors standing up in front of a classroom trying to indoctrinate students, to become Marxist or whatever. I mean, it strikes me as an exaggeration. Now, that's not the same thing as saying that there's not a real problem. I mean, I think we've just spent the last half an hour where I've been telling you that I think probably more stridently than most that I think that there is a real problem. But I think that, I think that I think there's also a risk with this. I mean, you're the journalism student, but I think there's always a risk in journalism in general, and I'm saying this totally as an outsider, of just focusing on the sort of more salient, more sort of extreme cases. Oh, this person said, I can't remember. This person said, I don't want to talk to white people or something. I think there was an example like that in the article or something like that, or I'm trying to minimize my interactions. And, yeah, that's pretty extreme. Is that indicative of presenting that in a way that suggests that it's indicative of broader campus culture? I don't know. I mean, how many people are there who share that sentiment? I don't know any. I mean, I don't know. I mean, clearly if there are, that's problematic, but I don't, so I think so what's the line between sort of reporting and feeding a frenzy? I don't pretend to be the expert on having the answer to that, but I do think that there's a line.
Just having a conversation about it. All of our articles are based on independently verified footage and video. And photography, we do interviews with scholars like you and students. We ask for public records requests. We look at course syllabi. We get in contact with the university. So, we've covered things like you've mentioned, extreme comments made from professors. Like one professor wanted to blow up all Republicans. He posted that on Facebook. Another professor wished Trump supporters died before the election. And there's many more examples on our website. So I guess my question to you would be, how is it hyperbolic, I guess, to cover the hyperbole and the exaggeration of others? I know we're highlighting the most extreme examples on campus, but I guess it is important to highlight those because whether or not that's indicative of a larger population, there's still extreme examples. And I would argue that it's pretty indicative of at least one portion of a population on a college campus.
It's a fair question. I think that maybe it's a question of, I haven't given this a whole lot of thought, but maybe it's a question of balance. But again, like talk about incentives, you're talking about what gets the most clicks and what gets the most, and I'm not suggesting that, to the best of my knowledge, Campus Forum is not making things up. I don't think you're like concocting things. Not suggesting that, but I think it's a question of balance. And I think there are also, what is the right, I'm just trying to think, like, what is the right, what is the right way forward? Like, what is the right, so something that's there would be an approach, but again, this is not, Campus Reform has its own model, and I'm not an expert on what that model is, but I think that there are ways that you can either, again, I don't just mean Campus Reform, just in general, like these are sensitive and controversial issues. You can be reactive or you can be sort of constructive. And I think that the reactive and the sort of like, oh my God, can you believe this? I mean, I get it. It has a place and whatever, but I prefer to engage in the constructive space. Like I would rather be trying to move the conversation forward and trying to move the dialogue forward than focusing on that. But I'm not, my salary doesn't depend on how many clicks I get on my website. So, like, I get that it's complicated, but I guess that's what I'm saying. It's sort of, it's not that it's not that you shouldn't report on things. But at what point does it start to, does it start to suggest or seem like you're suggesting that this is all professors think this, or because there can be, but again, like, and you don't even have to, again, this is a question of sort of like what gets clicks and whatever, but you don't even have to, I mean, there's sort of those extreme cases, but there's plenty to focus on without sort of highlighting. And the other problem, I mean, just is that, from where I stand, in Campus Reform, you can be more easily dismissed. This is sort of what that article was about, right? And to a certain extent, is that within the academy, it's sort of like, oh, it was published at Campus Reform, or frankly, to some extent, to a lesser extent, National Review, or whatever the conservative outlet is, and therefore it's immediately discredited. Now, how do you avoid that trap. And that sort of comes from both sides. I don't know. I mean, I don't have the solution. That was sort of what I was trying to get at in the piece. I don't have the solutions. So yeah.
And last question, I guess, just to wrap all of this up. When looking at the work we do at Campus Reform, whether or not it's hyperbolic is besides the point, but looking at the work that we, the events that we cover, the things that professors say, and again, we're not saying all professors are like this, but really highlighting those professors that do say these radical things, and we want parents to see what's happening in the classroom. I think that's something during COVID. One of the benefits was that is during the Zoom calls or, when students were at home and they listened to what their professors were saying, that really opened up parents' eyes to what was being taught in the classroom. And that's one of the reasons, why we do our work at Campus Reform. But going back to that question, why do you think it's so important to A, highlight what's happening in the classroom, and B, I guess, be on more of the constructive side like you and teaching the course that we talked about today?
I think, so your first question was, why is it important to pay attention to what's going on in the classroom? I mean, I think that it's important to, I think it's a missed opportunity in a lot of ways to constructively engage on really important questions. I think that we could be doing a lot better than we collectively as instructors. I think we could be doing a lot better than we are in talking to students and preparing them for how to engage on really what are complicated, sensitive, controversial, moral questions. And I think we're not doing a good job at it. And I think that we can do better. I mean, I think this is what I've tried to do. Here's the other thing. It's not even that hard, right? I mean, it's not that hard to do better. It's not like you have to pay, it's not like you need a $50,000 budget, you need to bring in, speakers. And I mean, these are not complicated tools. And so in terms of, and this is what I've tried to do in sort of, one of the organizations that I've started is the Mill Center for the Advancement of Critical Thinking, is like, this is not hard to do. There are, between what's out there on YouTube in terms of, I don't mean like the sensational stuff, but I mean like, academics, having conversations about, some of the conversations I know that I've used in class between Glenn Lowry and John McWhorter, like, these are two well-respected academics talking about issues around race in a way that is against the grain, I suppose you would say. There's no cost to that. It's a video. And so there are other things, there are other sort of tools that are really mostly free. And so it's not hard. It's really not hard to do. And we could be doing a lot better than we are. And I think that gets back to the other question of, what is the goal? Like, what are you trying to build? And orient towards that goal. And let's get that squared away. Again, I don't have the power. No one has to listen to me. So, but that I think would be a much better space to be in because again, I think it's not magic, but it's not impossible. Like, this is not hard. It's not hard to do better.